Okay, I am going to go over critiquing again. I don't know who's going to watch this video, but I just wanted to make another video where I talk about it just to kind of refine some of our skills, because some of us are still having a little bit of trouble and we're just making some mistakes similar to like getting that we know the answer, but we're just doing the opposite. And so just to clarify some things. So on this, I don't again have my, I can't show both the document and the FMX, so I'm just going to try to make some marks here. So for this upper right molar shot, when we look at this, we can see that, we can see that there's overlap here. So we can see some overlap there. So we'd put an H for horizontal angulation. You guys are usually spot on with that. You do a really good job with that. And then as far as the placement of our second molar, that's a horribly not straight line, but we're pretty darn close to being centered of the film. If we wanted to be super nitpicky, we could say placement error and that we need to put the film more posterior. So we'd fill in the back portion of the little X, moving the sensor more posterior just to get a little bit more centered, but it's pretty darn close. So we could just say horizontal and be fine. As far as vertical angulation, you can see that the palatal root is way up here, and the buccal and mesial and distal buccal roots are way down here. Plus, we can see there's quite a variation between this cusp and the buccal cusp. So that kind of tells us that there's quite a bit of vertical angulation. So in our little box, we would mark vertical angulation on here. There's also overlap here and here, so we know we would put that there. Just as a side note as well, does anybody see some landmarks? Here we can see our zygomatic process and the maxillary sinus. So in our next one, this is our premolar shot, and because it's our premolar shot, we don't care that these are overlapped. That doesn't matter to us, so we're not going to look at the overlap of the molars, but we do notice that this is open, and this is open. Now, I would say we could probably get a little bit more forward. So in the positioning, you could put positioning error and you could move it forward. The film is a little bit kind of tilted up this way, but this could also have to do with their bite. It could just be their occlusion. So we would put no horizontal angulation error, but we would put a position error and put it a little bit more anterior. Again, you can see the pretty big difference between the cusps here and here, and the length of the palatal root to the buccal roots. So then we know that that's some vertical angulation in that picture. The next one, we have the canine over here. Oh my gosh, can't draw a straight line. The canine is not centered, so we want to put the sensor a little bit more posterior just to bring the canine to more of the center of the film. We don't care if the premolars overlap or the distal of the canine, but we do want this open and this open if we can see it. So there's a slight bit of horizontal angulation, so we would put H there for a horizontal angulation error. Other than that, this film looks good. And then what do we see right through here? What landmark do we see right through here? That's the floor of the nasal fossa. Then here in this next one, we have the central incisors are pretty close. They're pretty centered. I think there's some overlap here and here, but it's a little bit hard to tell. I can't really zoom in, I don't think. So I'd probably put some very slight horizontal angulation there. And then these look a little bit short. They may be foreshortened a little bit. It's a little harder to tell, but they do look a little stubby, so there could be some vertical angulation. But if that wasn't marked, I probably wouldn't mark it wrong because it's a little bit hard to tell. They don't look severely shortened, but they do look fairly shortened. So they look a little shorter than this film, but pretty similar to this film. So I do think that there's probably a slight vertical. As far as landmarks go, we see some soft tissue of the nose right here. We can see the nasal fossa here and here. We can see the nasal spine and the nasal septum. And then I think you can see some of the nasal concha up in here too. And over here as well. You can see a little bit of the nasal concha. Here's the other canine shot. We have a canine that's not really centered, so we'd like to put the film more posterior. So we're going to mark the P and the more posterior part of that box. We have a little horizontal angulation error here, but not there. So we'd mark the X box as well. And then we have a little bit of the floor of the nasal fossa, and you can just start to see a little bit of the maxillary sinus there, and this is that little bit of that inverted Y right up in that corner there. Over here on this film, we need to go more anterior, so there would be a positioning error with the box filled in at the anterior. So we'd fill in the box over here because the film needs to move forward to get the distal of the canine. And then here we have the zygomatic process and we have the maxillary sinus. This is a little thicker white and it's a U or J shaped, and then the thinner line of the floor of the maxillary sinus. We can also see as far as errors, it looks like there's a little bit of vertical angulation here because of the distance of the cusps, and then the difference in the roots. And then it wouldn't have to move up or down, even though this molar's cut off a little bit, because it's a premolar film and we want to see more anterior. But over here, when we look at the molar film, we see horizontal angulation, a little bit of vertical angulation error. We can see the zygomatic process, maxillary sinus, and then we can see the maxillary tuberosity right through here. This potentially over here, coming back around to here, this potentially could be the coronoid process. I'm not 100% positive that that's what that is. But we know that the coronoid process sometimes peeks in a maxillary film. And look, they have an extra wisdom tooth up here. They have this wisdom tooth, and then they have an extra one. And over here, they got all kinds of wisdom teeth. Oh, look, it's called FMX with extra wisdom teeth. Well, that's why. Okay, so when we look at the bite wings, positioning is good here. This is your second molar. It's more toward the back, so it would be, we could get a little bit more posterior, but you don't, because it's an FMX and you can skip pretty far on the PAs, it's okay. If it was just this series of bite wings, you'd probably definitely would like to try and get a little bit farther back. So it kind of depends on what's there, but you do have the third molar space pretty good here on the mandible. Here's the external oblique ridge, and you can see here that maxillary tuberosity there as well. Over here we have pretty good placement. It's maybe a little more forward than it needs to be, but really it's fine. You have closed contacts here and here, which matter, so there is horizontal angulation, but the placement is probably fine to see. And then here again we have horizontal angulation, and then the second molar's not centered, so we could get a little bit farther back, but since it's in an FMX series, it's really not that big of a deal. We would never retake it, obviously. Down here on the lower we have the submandibular fossa. I'll just jump into some anatomy. You can see that pretty well there in this space. It's kind of a large radiolucent space. You can't really see anything else of too much interest. I think you can kind of see a little bit of a mental fossa there. It looks a little bit more radiolucent right through there, but that's really all. I can't even really pick up a specific. We have the external oblique, and that might be the canal right here, the mandibular canal. But this is a little bit, there's less to see right through here on this, on these pictures. But as far as placement, the second molar's here, so it could have gone back just a little bit more. That probably would have been just a little bit better. Here we have some vertical angulation. You can see the cusps heights are quite different here and here. So there's quite a bit of, there's some foreshortening, quite a bit of foreshortening. You can see the difference in the root lengths from here to there and from there to there. This one is much longer, so you know there's foreshortening in here. So the placement here is fine, and you can see the apices here and here pretty good, but you would put vertical angulation error. And then over here, the canine's pretty centered, so that's good. Everything else looks pretty good there. These teeth, this looks nice and centered, and then the canine's off to the side a little bit, but it's really not that bad. I mean, it could have moved a little bit posterior to center the canine just a smidge more, but it's really okay. And then here, again, we have placement area of it could have gone more anterior to get the distal of the canine so that we could open up that contact, but you can see the apices nicely. And then here on the molar, the second molar is pretty centered, so that's a pretty good film. So that was just another review of what we're looking for when we're looking for moving forward, moving posterior, moving anterior, moving posterior, horizontal angulation. In the premolars, you want every premolar contact plus the distal of the canine. In the molar, you want the molar contacts opened. And if you can see it over here, then that's fine, but it doesn't have to be in the premolar shot. And then we look for vertical angulation, look for foreshortened roots and a separation, oh, for heaven's sakes, and a separation in the cusps, so that really shows, because normally they're superimposed over each other, closer to, like you can see here, they're more superimposed, but when you can see more of the occlusal surface, there's more vertical angulation error. So just kind of a refresher, and I hope that kind of answers any questions that anyone has been wondering about, or if they're struggling when they go to critique.